This is your urgent call to action. We are all called to lead in a world in chaos, crisis, and turmoil. Join a pivotal global movement for change to transform the leadership crisis worldwide. Will you play it safe, or will you wake up, step up, and speak out? Like Nelson Mandela did for South Africa and the world, we need a radical new way to think, act, and lead, leading boldly into the future. Join host Anne Pratt, a Harvard Fellow and multi-awarded businesswoman, and unlock the best version of yourself to revolutionize leadership with what the world needs now.
Greetings to all you future bold leaders. Thank you for joining us from around the world. My name is Anne Pratt. I'm formerly from South Africa, and I relocated abroad to attend a Harvard Advanced Leadership Initiative Fellowship in beautiful Boston in the United States of America. Today, our thoughtful bold leader is one of the world's leading criminal prosecutors, an academic, an author, and a jurist who grew up in a rural German-speaking part of Belgium. He reflects on his lifelong quest for international justice, on leadership and heroes. He is currently the chief prosecutor of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, an international court set up by the United Nations Security Council. He leads a team that tracks down and prosecutes fugitives and war criminals in the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, and beyond. In 2006, he led an independent international investigation into the assassination of the Lebanese Prime Minister, Rafik Hariri. Before the UN, he was the first elected deputy prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, set up in 2002 in The Hague, in the Netherlands. In his early career, he worked for the European Commission, the Council of Europe, and served as deputy to the Prosecutor General of the Liège Appeal Court in Belgium. His bold leadership has inspired a Nobel Peace Prize nomination and earned him a Nobel title from the King of Belgium. Stay tuned as he shares powerful insights on the failure of war, delivering justice across global borders, and prejudice in his young life, and how that wheel of fortune has changed. We warmly welcome my inspiring friend, the Right Honourable Lord, Dr. and Chief Prosecutor Serge Brammertz, and welcome to Leading Boldly into the Future. Serge, my friend, it's so wonderful to see you again. It's been a while since we connected in Kigali in Rwanda, but thank you so much for making the time, and thank you for bringing your very powerful voice to this global message and movement.
My pleasure, Anna.
I would love to begin with your thoughts. You know, some have said we're a world at war, and, the Geneva Academy is committed to international human rights and international law around human rights, measures and monitors armed conflicts around the world. And they've said that, they've measured more than 110 armed conflicts, which of course spans regions like Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Gaza, the broader Middle East, and of course, Sudan, Myanmar, and Mali, just to name a few. I just wondered, what are your thoughts as a person who's been hugely committed to find and search for international justice? What are your thoughts around the current state of the world and what many have called a world at war?
Well, it is an unfortunate reality that there have never been so many conflicts ongoing simultaneously. There have never been so many displaced persons internally within countries, but also internationally.
Yeah.
And the sad reality is that for the majority of those crimes, impunity is the rule and prosecutions are the exception.
Yeah.
Now, I'm in this field now I started at the International Criminal Court as deputy prosecutor in when was it? In 2003, right? At that time, we all thought, my generation of international lawyers, we really thought, wow, now with the creation of the International Criminal Court, we have one permanent international court. It will be the beginning of a new era. Now, 20 years later, the unfortunate reality is that our dreams we had at that time have not been realized. Now, at that time, I would qualify or call myself a believer in international justice, but perhaps a very idealistic one. Today, I would say I'm still a believer because there's no alternative, but I'm much more down to earth. I'm much more realistic in what I think we can achieve or not achieve. But I think the most important is that even if there are setbacks, even if today the situation and the world is not what it should be, even if today multilateralism is under pressure and nationalism is on the rise, I don't think we can give up. There are so many people around the world who believe that justice remains important, that there is more to win by working together than by insisting on differences. So I agree with your quite negative assessment, but giving up is not an option.
Yeah, and when I say, negative, I mean, I think what strikes me is just that we seem to have these unprecedented levels. So I guess that's a wonderful segue into saying or asking, what is justice? How do you define justice? And what does justice and accountability look like in the world today?
That's a very complex one. And it really depends on how you look at it and from which perspective. I think as a prosecutor, we have obviously one aspect, which is punishment, because as prosecutors, we are coming in when it's too late, right? Well, when prevention has failed, when deterrence has failed. So basically, we are coming in when it's too late, which is really not how the world should function. If you look at, our friends Alice and Nderitu, her job was or is the prevention of genocide. That's why our offices work so closely together, because prevention should be the priority. Well, if prevention has not worked, accountability is extremely important to create deterrence in order to prevent future crimes. So those aspects need to be together. Now, from a victim's perspective, I think accountability justice is very different. It's about recognition as the victim. It's about compensation. It's about seeing those responsible being prosecuted. I started one of our first investigations at the ICC was in relation to Uganda, when we were investigating the Lord Resistance Army, which was abducting thousands and thousands of children to make them child soldiers, many of them abused, killed, etc. And when I went to see survivors and parents, and we had many discussions with groups of survivors, I really noticed that where for us, conducting an investigation, arresting the fugitives, having them prosecuted was the number one priority. When you spoke with the survivors and the victims, they were saying, well, number one priority is we want this conflict to end. Number two, we want to leave those camps, those internally displaced camps. We want to go home. 3, we want our children back. We want amnesty laws. We want to see our children coming back to our families. 4, we want really to live, have a decent life and enough to eat. And number 5 was only accountability and justice, with even a slight preference for traditional justice and domestic justice, where the local communities are very much involved. So I think it's very important as international prosecutor that we have to understand that the expectation from accountability and justice depends very, very much depending on which side you are in relation to what, if you are a victim or a survivor, if you are a politician in the country concerned, if you are a potential perpetrator or someone like us working at an international tribunal.
Yeah, no, you make such powerful points. And interesting in your example in Uganda. But, you've had some wonderful successes, Serge. And, when I think about your role in the former, Yugoslavia, can you share with us in terms of that horrific conflict and then, prosecutions, which sometimes took a long time? What is a moment when you were in that role as chief prosecutor for the International Criminal Tribunals for former Yugoslavia, what was your low point and what was the turning point that kind of gave you a sense of we can achieve justice here? Can you take us back in time to that moment?
Yeah. I mean, there have been 4 different prosecutors during the lifetime of the Yugoslav tribunal. It started in 2003 with Richard Goldstone, and you had other prosecutors following, and I took over from Carla Del Ponte in 2008. She was the third prosecutor. And when I took over in 2008, it was already many years after the conflict ended, and the international community and the Security Council was already speaking about the closure of the tribunal. And I remember at that time that there were still Karadzic and Mladic, Karadzic being the president of the Serbian entity, and Mladic being the supreme military commander, and they were both seen as the architects of the genocide. It's really a very unfortunate reality that we were thinking, well, this tribunal will close without 2 of the main perpetrators never having been arrested. This was really my main thought when I started in January 2008. As I said, Carla Del Ponte had tried, before her Luis Harbour, Richard Goldstone. So 3 very senior prosecutors I was looking up to, and they had all tried to create the political context in which those arrests were possible. And we were in this lucky situation with my team when I arrived that, 7 months later, in July 2008, Karadzic was arrested. It was the result of many factors: a political change in the country, a different head of the intelligence service, a lot of support from the European Union. We had also put in place some new, more modern investigative techniques. And this was definitely, in my professional career, one of the most important moments, also because I had met several times in the months before the arrest survivors and victims and the mothers of Srebrenica. As you know, many of them lost all their male members of their family.
But there were about 8 to 10,000 Muslim men.
Yes, 8 to 10,000. So it was, they almost 10,000. In total, even many more people had found refuge in a safe haven, which was a UN protected zone. But it was, taken over by the Bosnian Serb military forces. Women and children were evacuated. Men were taken prisoner, but only to be executed in the following 3 weeks. Victims being between 16 and 60 years old. And I met many times with the survivors, mothers of Srebrenica and other victims organizations. And like the chairperson, Munira Subasic, she lost more than 20 male members of her family, her husband, her brothers, her sons. So I knew what it would mean for the survivors, because what had really struck me when I met those organizations, that they were not really speaking about their very difficult life conditions. They were not speaking about never having received any compensations. Their main request was really, we want to see the person responsible for our suffering in the courtroom in The Hague. And I remember when the arrest took place, and a few days later, the first hearing in court, where many of those mothers were present in the courtroom. This was definitely, I would say, an important moment for my entire team and myself, because this is why you are doing this job. That's why you are going through difficult moments, to really play a modest role in making a difference in the life of survivors and victims. And that's really what I think we all appreciate about our work. We can have impact if we make a difference. But it took then still 3 years more to get General Mladic arrested. We thought it would be easier or faster, but again, it was a very, very painful 3 years investigating and trying to create the political climate and to increase the pressure on the government in Belgrade to have him arrested.
You make such a good point, Serge, and that's a great segue into the question. So in that context, how do you define leadership, and what, from a leadership point of view, do you think was required to create that pivotal turning point?
Well, you can only call yourself a leader if you have people who are following, right?
Yeah.
And, when I was a young prosecutor, it was more about authority, about power. And if when I was a young prosecutor, my prosecutor general was calling, you were immediately thinking, oh, what have I done wrong? What is happening? And it was a mix between fear and respect, right? I think nowadays, in the world of today, people are not following anyone or accepting any leadership which is not based on trust, empowerment, delegation, and teamwork. So this is really something I have really learned also in Belgium when I had the opportunity to be federal chief prosecutor, that really putting your own team around yourself, because, as a leader, without a strong team, you cannot be successful. And why have we been successful? Well, as I said, many factors are coming together. My predecessors have done an excellent work, but there are always many factors which need to come together for international prosecutors. When I was prosecutor in Belgium, well, there's a hostage taking place somewhere in Brussels or elsewhere, or someone has been killed, there was a terrorist attack, and we had at the airport. Well, you immediately send dozens, if not hundreds, of investigators to the crime scene. You have all the analysts, you have the forensic experts, you secure evidence. You have the total support by the public opinion, because no one wants on its territory those crimes taking place, and you have the support by the public by the government, because ministers and governments like to show how efficient their operational services are.
Yeah.
When you are an international prosecutor, you have none of this, right?
Yeah.
If I look at my predecessors, when the genocide in Srebrenica took place in July 95, right?
Yeah.
It took at that time the prosecutor 1 year before being able to send the first investigators to the crime scene, because it was not safe. And then sending investigators, you send a handful of investigators because you only have limited resources.
Yeah.
You are not supported by the public opinion in the country concerned, or by the political class, because the political class were those merely responsible for committing the crimes. And of course, they were supported by their public opinion. And the fact that it took 1 year for investigators to come on the crime scene, well, it was used by Bosnian Serbs to move thousands of bodies from primary mass graves to secondary mass graves, which made the work much more difficult later on. And even today, every year, there are still secondary mass graves discovered and bodies are found, even so many years, even 30 years after the conflict.
Yeah. You make such a good point, because in this global world and so many of these conflicts, we have countries, invading other countries. Not only in the multi-ethnic environment of former Yugoslavia, but if we look at other wars and conflicts going on, often it's other countries invading those countries. So the political complexity, from a leadership point of view, how have you navigated that, Serge? Do you have an example where you have pulled the right strings from a leadership point of view to get the political will and support to get those investigations done and to bring those people actually arrested and then bringing them to trial?
As an international prosecutor, you don't have your own police force, you don't have an army, you cannot force a country to arrest someone. So it's all about, well, to say it nicely, it's about incentives, but to say it more directly, it's about sticks and carrots, right? So when we needed to have our last fugitives arrested in Serbia, we really intensified our cooperation with the Serbian services, which was definitely an important element. But I've always said that the main political factor has been the so-called conditionality policy of the European Union, because all the countries in the former Yugoslavia at that time, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Serbia, Montenegro, all these countries have or want to join the European Union. And we had a very clear understanding with the European Union institutions, with the European Commission, to say that, well, to move to the next level in EU integration, full cooperation with the prosecutor's office is one of the preconditions. So I've been a number of times in Brussels at that time in 2008 to brief the Council of Ministers of the European Union about the obstacles or the advances in relation to the cooperation. And I really could see that at a certain moment, when you looked at surveys within Serbia, the support to join the European Union was above 70%, and the support for the non-arrest of Karadzic or Mladic was around 60%. So the fact is that, and I don't think this is only in the Balkans like this, political leadership very often is very much influenced what they think will give the biggest support in terms of electorate. So I think this political pressure, if I may say, by the European Union has played a very important role. And you don't have the same support for the International Criminal Court or for other institutions which are not really supported by the European Union in the same way. And fact is also that because our tribunals are UN tribunals, right, put in place based on Chapter 7 of the UN Charter, it also means that theoretically the Security Council could decide to use force to implement our mandate. This has never happened, even not closely, but we have always, and we are still reporting every 6 months to the United Nations Security Council, which is renewing our mandate every 2 years, which is appointing the chief prosecutors, and of course, being able to report to the UN Security Council, being able to have the support by members of the Security Council also creates pressure on UN member states to fulfill their international obligations.
Yeah, that's such an important insight, Serge. I mean, and perhaps if we step back for a bit, because, with your legal mind, can you help our audience just draw the distinction for us between war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity? How would you define and differentiate those in terms of the legal system?
I mean, I will not go too much into details because, explaining the difference it's a 40 hours course at university, right?
Yeah.
So in very simple terms, if I may say, war crimes, of course, means that there is an armed conflict ongoing at the international or national level. There are questions in relation to intensity and parties to the conflict, but it really mainly means that the Geneva Conventions become applicable, which are really trying to put some rules into an armed conflict where it's basically about fighting and about killing each other, where you have a number of rules put in place by the Geneva Convention, protecting civilians, protecting prisoners, protecting civilian buildings. So that's really when we speak about war crimes within an armed conflict. If we speak about crimes against humanity, it is, the short definition would be it's a widespread and systematic attack against the civilian population, right? So it can also happen within an armed conflict, but it can also happen in different circumstances. And genocide can happen in the context of those conflicts, but it has this very specific moral element. This moral element, which is the intention by the perpetrator to destroy in whole or in part a group for what they are, the religious, social, or other group. So those are different qualifications. Very often, we prosecute the same individual for the three categories, because in a conflict you can have war crimes, you can have crimes against humanity, but also genocide, like it was in the former Yugoslavia. But sometimes people are saying, well, there's a hierarchy. The worst is genocide. And sometimes people are almost disappointed if they are not seen as victims of of genocide, where we are always saying that, from a victim's perspective, from a family who is losing their loved ones, does it really matter if they have been killed in the context of an illegal war, a crime of aggression, or a war crime, or during a crimes against humanity, or a victim in the context of a genocide? For the individual victim, it doesn't, or it shouldn't make a difference. It's mainly from a legal perspective that there are different qualification prosecutors are using before the judges, and at the end of the day, well, judges decide about the crimes which have been committed, but we consider them all, of course, as atrocity crimes and particular grave crimes.
Yeah, no, that's pretty comprehensive. What case are you most proud of, Serge?
There have been many cases we have worked on, and I always regret that there is a kind of tendency to look more at the profile of the perpetrators than the victims behind, because my logical answer would be, well, the Karadzic case and the Mladic case, which were the most prominent during my time in office, where we got life sentences because those individuals were seen as responsible for killings of 10,000s of people in many different municipalities, so ethnic cleansing campaigns in Bosnia-Herzegovina. They were responsible and convicted for the siege of Sarajevo, where during 3 years more than 10,000 people were killed, more than 1,000 small children killed by snipers, and they were convicted for the genocide in Srebrenica. But, in total, there have been 161 individuals being indicted. As I said again, for the individual victims, it doesn't really matter how prominent the perpetrator was. When Karadzic was arrested, I don't know if you remember, he was hiding as Dr. Dabic in plain sight in Belgrade. He had lost 10, 20 kilos. He had a white beard. He was living as a healer. He had even participated in TV shows with his new identity, which I think was quite extraordinary in terms of story. But I said to a number of journalists when they asked me for the 10th time about the white beard, I said, this is most likely a future genocidaire once he has been convicted. This is a war criminal, probably a genocidaire. Show more interest for the survivors and the victims and for the crimes he has committed, and go away from this fascination for perpetrators. So that's why I would say those two cases were the most important. But as I said, from a victim's perspective, it really doesn't make any difference how prominent the perpetrator was. And in relation to the Rwanda tribunal, well, we worked the last few years very intensively about the fugitive tracking, and having managed to arrest Félicien Kabuga in France only a few years ago, and only 2 years ago, Kaishima in South Africa, were definitely also two important moments where we have seen what it means still today, so many years later, what it means if we manage to get those fugitives arrested.
Yeah, and interesting with Kabuga in Rwanda. I mean, what's interesting about that, given how long these investigations and prosecutions take, I mean, from what I know, he ultimately, I mean, he was quite old when he was eventually arrested, I think 83, and then was declared unfit to stand trial because they said he had dementia and wouldn't be fit for trial. In your view, is there something that the system could do differently to change the way or speed up the way it conducts these investigations to bring people to trial earlier so that people can see some form of justice being exercised?
Yeah, of course, justice needs to be served as quickly as possible. And we all learn at university and we all read in papers, justice delayed is justice denied, right?
Yeah.
But it's not really, you cannot really say that this applies at the international level, because someone who is very powerful today, you will not be able to have him arrested. But you have to wait sometimes 5 years, 10 years, 20 years to be able to prosecute. So what is important is that you accept that timing is a very, very important issue, and that you have to keep watching and waiting for the right moment. Now, in relation to Kabuga, it's not that there was no willingness to have him arrested already 20 years ago. It was just that he was hiding as a fugitive for a long time. He had been in a number of countries, and it's only because we really put in place very modern investigative techniques in relation to phone analysis, in relation to movements of persons of interest, in relation to financial investigations, which had not been done previously. It's only through those investigations that we were in a position to have him arrested. Now, as I said to survivors and victims, well, this is already extremely important that finally we managed to have him arrested, because for many, this was impossible even to imagine. I got phone calls from former prosecutor generals from Rwanda the day he was arrested to say, well, we thought this day would never ever happen. We had given up. So when my team and when we set up this operation near Paris to have him arrested and were successful, it was a very important moment. Now, it is very unfortunate that the trial was interrupted after 3 experts concluded that his dementia would not allow him to participate in a fair trial. And it's disappointing. We were not happy with it. We would have hoped that the trial can continue. We also think there were enough arguments to do so. But it is a decision by the judges we have to accept. And so this is really the difference between us and them, if I may say, where they have showed during the crimes they have committed zero humanity, where they have acted in the most brutal way, killing women and children. Well, we are not using the same attitudes. We represent humanity. So even the worst criminals, we treat them with humanity to show that we are different and that violence, brutality, and killing is never an option.
Yeah, those are important points. I mean, it's like different rules to the game, isn't it? But that those rules are critical to maintaining a system of integrity that people can trust and believe in. You're so passionate, Serge, and you've had such a remarkable career. I mean, I've learned that, you always dreamt of being a prosecutor, and I think you had to wait until you were 26 years of age before you could actually officially apply to become a prosecutor. Going back to your own childhood, and I know you grew up in a very happy rural environment in Belgium, which has its own history in terms of being part of Germany and then becoming part of Belgium. What would you say in your childhood, Serge, was a pivotal moment, perhaps a difficult moment, even in this happy home, a difficult moment? Can you take us back there? And what in that childhood, how did you kind of pivot out of a more challenging time in your childhood? What was that?
Probably the part of Belgium I'm coming from played a role, because when I was a child, even at my first year at university, I got sometimes negative reactions, even from professors, because I was coming from the German-speaking part. And this was in the 80s, only 35 years after the war. And some people really had negative attitudes towards someone from my part of Belgium. So I understood, even if it was in a peaceful way, so I understood that you can even be disrespected in your own country, because I'm born in Belgium and I love my country, and there's absolutely no reason why someone would have this negative attitude towards myself. And
why do you think they had that negative attitude? Was it because you came from...
I mean, it was because Belgium suffered a lot during the Second World War, when Hitler invaded Belgium and took it over during a very short period. And because my part of Belgium became only Belgium after the First World War, Versailles Treaty in 1920, it was a kind of compensation of those territories giving to Belgium. But it maintained, it stayed German-speaking, right? And so when Hitler took over, he later on said, well, we never accepted this annexation by Belgium, and so we consider this part of the Belgian territory. And it created this crazy situation that at the beginning of the war, people from my part of Belgium were fighting as Belgian soldiers. But once Germany has decided, well, this is part of Germany again, well, some of them became German soldiers. So you had, even within families, many conflicts. And I think these very few negative attitudes that I had in my own country, or if football teams from my region would play within the French-speaking part, they would very often being insulted as well based on their German origin. So I really think it is understandable, because Belgium suffered very much the crimes by the Nazi regimes, but people in my region were not responsible for it. There was always this story I will never forget of an uncle of one of my friends. When we were at university, we had in the first year to tell or to find a story from our region. And I forgot really the details, so I give you the short version. But it was someone from my city, from my village, a young man. He was in his 20s.
And sorry, what was the name of your village, Serge?
It was Eupen, so it's the German-speaking city in Belgium. And this uncle of my friend, he was 20 years old. He was a Belgian soldier when Germany invaded Belgium, right? So he was taken prisoner. He was taken to a German prisoner camp. So they interviewed him, and they noticed that he spoke German exactly like in Germany. They said, well, you are coming from this part. We never accepted being part of Belgium, so you have to choose. Or you go to a war detention camp, or you fight with us and you become a German soldier. And the young guy, said, well, yeah, okay, then I don't want to go to a camp. He became a German soldier. So he was connected to the African Corps. And he was fighting with the Germans in Africa. I think, if I remember correctly, he was even decorated. But then at a certain moment, he was taken prisoner by the Brits. And he was taken to the UK. And there he was interviewed, and they said, well, wait a minute, we never accepted the decision by the Germans that you are not Belgian, so you have to choose, or you go to a prisoner camp, or you work with us. And in fact, the D-Day will be very soon, and we go to Normandy, and many people from my region go on vacation to this part of France. So he joined the American and British troops when they came into the Normandy, and then helped them, and he went back to Belgium at the end of the war. And then used this example a number of times to show that from an individual perspective, right? And the majority of victims in war, all soldiers, are individuals who don't necessarily understand the big picture. So from an individual perspective, a war never make sense. But from an individual perspective, it even doesn't make less sense, because the poor guy, 20 years old, he had no idea what was really happening with him.
Yeah. So how do you think, when you had those, I understand when you were at university, but how old were you when you first experienced this kind of historical prejudice that was acting out in current time? How old were you, and how did you feel at the time?
Well, I don't know exactly. Well, I was always very, very much fascinated by history, right? So when I was 9 years old, I wanted to become an archaeologist, right? We had a teacher at school who told fantastic stories about, the Greek Empire, the Roman culture, the different Chinese dynasties, the Inca culture. So I was always fascinated by all of it, and also, of course, by the First World War, Second World War, and trying understanding of what really happened. And it was only years later, 13, 14, that I would sense, or that I would go with friends on holidays or somewhere, and that we would speak French together and not German, and not to be seen as Germans, right? Nowadays, luckily, it's totally different. Now, I would say, German-speaking Belgium, we are the best protected minority in Belgium. and we are very much very positively considered by everyone. So this is really something we speak about 45 years ago. And when it happened to me for the first time, as I said, when I really noticed it was at university when I was 18, where I really thought, wow, this is really not a pleasant experience.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think inspired your, you mentioned you were interested in archaeology, but then, decided you wanted to become a prosecutor. What do you think inspired that passion?
Once I turned 13, 14, I thought about becoming a police officer, or in Belgium, it was the gendarmerie, becoming a gendarmerie officer. So I was looking at, should I do at 16 already an exam and join police services. I think when you are young like this, you cannot really say there's a main element which is influencing you. But perhaps I would say that I always hated injustice. I would say probably already as a child at school, if I would see that someone was not treated in the way he or she should be treated, I would be revolted and I would react. So I think I always had a very strong sense of justice, about right and wrong. And probably because also within my friends or my family, I think I was always considered the wiser than others, perhaps. I don't know. But in terms of judgment, trying to make a good judgment in relation to a situation and always trying to find solutions, right? To avoid conflict at any cost and to find compromises and solutions. So I think it's really this profound this dislike of injustice, if I would see it. And I really noticed later on that this was really the avenue I should take, because from the first course, when I was 18, my first course of criminal law, I really loved it. And I knew from my first month at university, criminal law is my field, and I want to be a prosecutor. Also, once I finished, I was 23 when I finished, I opened a law office because I needed 3 years of professional experience before being able to apply for a prosecutor's job. And I really did not like being a defense lawyer. Everyone needs to be defended. Everyone has the right to have the best possible defense. But I noticed for myself that there were some cases where I really had difficulties to take the defense of a criminal. And as a young lawyer, you have to take a number of cases, so-called Podil cases of individuals who don't have the financial resources, so you're obliged to take those cases. And I remember that, and I had big fights with the Bar Association, that in one or two occasions, I basically refused to take a case, one of them related to, the rape of a 4-year-old child, a little girl, where I should have been in a position to take this case, right? Because everyone has the right to be defended. But I really could convince the bar associations, persons, to say, look, it's not in the interest of this individual to be represented by me. I can't. It was at the beginning of my career. Perhaps later on it would have been different. But it is obvious that once I became a prosecutor, I was much more passionate about investigating those crimes, looking for perpetrators, having them arrested and prosecuted, than being a defense lawyer.
Yeah, no, and you've had a remarkable career that shows that passion is lived out in different countries around the world. Turning to somebody who is known to be incredibly passionate, and has become a global icon around fighting for justice, Nelson Mandela, somebody we both admire and respect. Can you share with us what Mandela represents for you? And is there a particular moment in your life, whether you read about him, read a book, watched a movie, saw him on television, that really stands out for you, Serge, as a moment that inspired you in terms of how you carry out your work in the world today?
Unfortunately, I never had the opportunity to meet him, right?
Yeah.
But I met persons close to him, the Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I met him once in The Hague. who was, of course, also a very fascinating personality, full of joy on one hand, but also with a lot of gravitas in relation to the issues he was speaking about. Well, the prosecutor, Richard Goldstone, right?
Yes.
He told me that it was Mandela asking him to become the prosecutor. There had been some problems finding the right person to become the prosecutor of the Yugoslav tribunal, and it was really Nelson Mandela who played a very important role, if I remember correctly, in calling Goldstone for him to take the job. And of course, he's one of those very few persons who, you said icon, of course, an example of humanity, someone who spent such an important part of his life in prison and who came out without hate, but love for his country and a project, a vision, how to move forward as a society. If I look at South Africa today, I'm not sure that all his ideas and have really been implemented, and that many people are not really living up to what he was hoping to see happening in his country. But this is for me really this lesson for humanity, not being taken over by hate and injustice, and to keep this and to change this negative energy you have accumulated over so many years by doing something positive. That's definitely unique in our world.
So what was that moment that ignited it? Was when he walked out of prison? Do you remember, when you had that feeling about him? Or was it talking to Archbishop Tutu? Or
yeah, I cannot really say it was a moment, because I think Mandela is more like an institution or something which is permanently there, right? It's not like with other individuals where you have a certain moment. He's a living institution of hope. So it's difficult to find a certain moment. But again, as I said, it's always difficult to speak about someone you have never met, right?
yes.
I mean, my first boss at the UN was Kofi Annan, right? He was someone I met many times. I appreciated enormously. You cannot compare the individuals, of course, because Mandela is obviously something different. But I would imagine that in the personal interaction, there would be many similarities between the two, except, of course, that Mandela, because of the injustice he went through, had a totally different starting point when becoming a political icon than other individuals or other leaders had.
Yeah. And do you think that Mandela's example has inspired you in your work?
Definitely. When I finished my law degree, I really thought I was a bit hesitant to go into politics or diplomacy or becoming a prosecutor, because at that time I was already, before becoming a prosecutor, I had been elected into the municipal council in my city.
Okay.
So I was 23 years old. I went for an election. I was elected into the municipal council, and I liked politics. I also liked at that time already very much diplomacy and was considering doing the diplomatic exams. But at the end, I went back to my first love, and I said, no, I always want to be a prosecutor. So I want to be. And somehow what Nelson Mandela represents is part of those three different worlds, right? He was a very smart politician trying to achieve his objective through diplomacy, which brings me to the second point. He was a very fine politician, but a very excellent diplomat.
Yeah.
But he also was looking for accountability and was looking at his country about Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So somehow I see him as one of the first multidisciplinary international actors who really played in those three fields, which I think need to come together to be successful. politics, diplomacy, and accountability.
Yeah, such a powerful point, Serge. Do you think Mandela's leadership is relevant in the world today? And if so, why? But if not, why not?
He obviously made it clear that the interest of the country and his communities and his society was the number one objective, and that despite all the wrongdoings of the apartheid, he knew that you can only as a community move forward if you accept the wrongdoings of the past, you find solutions to deal with the wrongdoings of the past as a kind of precondition to move forward together as a society and as a community, right?
Yeah.
And and this I and he did it at a South African perspective, but also at an African Union level, but also at a world scale. And with all respect for politicians around the world, there are today much less inspiring international personalities and figures who can have this aura, this gravitas, and are as inspirational to new generations. If I look within the European Union, extremists winning elections, discrimination, racism, becoming something visible every day. One topic which is really, unfortunately, big problem in the former Yugoslavia is all the glorification of war criminals, of hate speech. And those are politicians who are glorifying their own convicted war criminals and blaming the others. So in this sense, I think he will forever be this light, perhaps. I don't know if I should say light at the end of the tunnel where everyone should inspire to. And being a kind of mirror for politicians and leadership today, if they look in this mirror and ask themselves, do I really follow the example of Mandela? I think the very large majority, if they are really honest, must admit they are not.
They're not. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that this is still an example of leadership that provides light and inspiration and aspiration.
Absolutely. And when people over the last 20 years, or you have the question, who is your person you are looking up to? And as I said, I would more easily say, or a person you really respected, Kofi Annan, because I knew him and I worked with him. But if it would be from a global perspective, and of course having loved the movies, Norman Freeman's playing Mandela, if I'm not mistaken, right? No, I think it's a unique story which has never been seen before, and I don't know if it is possible that this can happen again. What is just disappointing, because I've been a number of times in South Africa, as you know.
Yeah.
We arrested almost 2 years ago one of our last main fugitives, Kai Shima, who allegedly is responsible for the killing of more than 2,000, mainly women and children, in a church in the Nyange province in Rwanda. He was an individual who, together with the mayor, he was the chief of police of this commune, together with the mayor and the priest, they really told everyone, please, you will be safe at the church. And once there were more than 2,000 people within the church, they tried first to put the church on fire and then used bulldozer to have the church collapsing on those 2,000 victims. And it was quite difficult to have South Africa cooperating with us to have him arrested. He was arrested in May. It would be 2 years ago. We are still trying to convince the judicial authorities in South Africa to have him transferred to us. And so what I would like to say is, with all respect for all my partners in South Africa as well, has the country really lived up to its legacy? Are there not certain areas or certain moments where the country is going backwards? And this why I think the story of Mandela is so important, because it's not a done deal, right? He He went through all the suffering. He changed his country fundamentally. He changed the world. But if you look at the world today, many of the lessons he taught are not implemented anymore.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Serge. And, and that's why this movement that we're all part of, this Mandela-inspired movement, is about reminding an older generation, of those lessons and having a look in the mirror and what did he stand for and how can I live up to that legacy today? It's as important as inspiring and empowering the next. And, to that point, I mean, there are a lot of challenges going on in the world. What are the three that keep you up at night most concerned about?
Luckily, I never dream about my work or about my job, which I always found almost a bit strange, despite all the atrocities I see, all the dark side of humanity I see every day. I'm sleeping well because I know we're doing the right thing, and I also know that I need a good sleep to have the energy to continue the next day. And sometimes it's a bit difficult that journalists would look at me and say, you are now a prosecutor for 35 years. You deal with international crimes for the last 20 years. You see the dark side. You see the dark side of humanity. Do you still believe in humanity, right? And then I'm always explaining that, yes, we arrested a lot of war criminals, a lot of genocidaries, but I'm not impressed by those persons. The persons who are really impressive are the victims and the survivors. Those are the only heroes in a conflict, as I like to say, because they have been coming forward again and again before our tribunal to testify against those perpetrators. So survivors and victims are much more impressive and are the only heroes. And then when they ask me, well, dark side of humanity, do you like this job or what are you doing? And it's difficult to say, well, I like this job because it comes over a little bit strangely, perhaps, if you say, well, I like doing investigations. But as I said, I think earlier, I think it's really a privilege for us international prosecutors to do a job where you can make a difference in the life of survivors and of victims. And those are small steps every time, but every time we are arresting one of those criminals, we feel good. So perhaps if I look back the last 20 years, I'm not trying anymore to change the world. I'm just going from case to have individual successes, which I think is much more rewarding than trying to change the world, which obviously we haven't managed to do. So what are the three? This was your question. What are my three main concerns? The fact that obviously humanity is somehow going backwards is probably my main concern. If you look at the leaders of the world and you look almost at all major nations and their leadership, and you forgive me that I'm not mentioning any specific country, you indeed see very nationalist agenda us against you. We see it even within the European Union, where, as a Belgian, we are one of the founders of the European Union. If I see how some countries are behaving today, are really not living up anymore to the ideas of the foundation of the European Union, it's very, very, very disappointing. So to see nationalism becoming more and more prevalent, politicians winning elections not by coming up with a great plan for their country, but more by criticizing the others and blaming everyone else but themselves about the wrongdoings and about difficulties economically or socially. I would say this is really the main disappointment I see. And if I look at I think education, I think, is another aspect where I see that a lot of things are going wrong. If we take Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example, you have schools of different communities, Bosnian, Croatian, or Serbian. They all have totally different history books because they all made a total different analysis about the crimes committed. So as a result, you have sometimes young people who were not even born during the war, who are today more radical than their predecessors. We have seen that at a certain moment, the Minister of Education in Republika Srpska, which is the Serbian part of Bosnia-Herzegovina, taking out any reference to the genocide in Srebrenica out of the history books by saying, well, it never happened.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is the most insulting you can do to victims of genocide, by saying that, well, the crime you suffered never happened.
Yeah.
In fact, I like to say that the denial of genocide is the final phase of the commission of genocide. First, you have tried to destroy an entire community for who they are, and then you even try to destroy the memory about this community by even denying that they existed, or even more so, that deny that the crimes have been committed. So, and this is in the former Yugoslavia a big problem, but also in other parts of the world.
Yeah. So the fact that humanity's gone backwards, the fact that education is revisionist, and and what is your biggest hope for the world, Serge?
It sounds always naive if you say, well, I hope peace is at the end of the day what unites us more than wars. But as I said, violence so much doesn't make any sense, right? As a young prosecutor, I was when I was 26, I was dealing with a juvenile crime. I was dealing with family, social aspects of family, and I was always thinking all this domestic violence within a couple, violence towards children, it just doesn't make any sense. I just watched again the news in Sudan, and you see all this violence between those two main fractions, and those 10,000 and 10,000s of civilians and people being killed, like it is the case in the other conflicts you mentioned earlier today. And I have still difficulties to conceptualize how any government or any individual which claims to be part of humanity would consider any form of violence, and even more so any form of aggression or war, a legitimate tool to achieve any form of objective.
It's trying to get one's head around that. On a lighter note, just a couple of fun facts about you. What is something about your childhood that you remember that you truly loved? A very happy memory from your childhood.
Well, my dad was a carpenter, right?
Yes.
So, and he was always home at 3:30 every day. So he started early in the morning, so he was back home very early. So as children, we spent a lot of time with him. So financially, it was probably relatively modest, the situation in which we were. But because our dad was always there, he was doing everything with us. And our common passion at that time was to take pictures of wild animals. So every weekend, Saturday or Sunday, we'd get up at 4 o'clock in the morning with our cameras, and I would spend hours and hours with my dad in the forest trying to take pictures of deers or birds or other animals. This was definitely always a very peaceful experience.
Yes. And another fun fact, what do you think your mother would have been most proud of in terms of how you've lived your life, your career?
Well, I think mothers are very proud about all their children, right? And we are 4 kids home. Of course, because I worked abroad, I probably had a particular relationship with my mother, because I would see her only a few times a year. I would call her every Saturday, of course, but I would not see her as often as my sisters and my brother. So I would never be there for the daily little problems.
Yeah.
And when Kofi Annan asked me to go to Lebanon, where the prime minister had been assassinated,
yes,
he asked me to go there, and I was at a nice job in The Hague at the ICC, and I consulted 6 of my best friends, ambassadors from the Middle East and other parts, and I asked them, should I take this job, yes or no? And 3 of them said, "Are you crazy? Why would you
Yeah.
take this job? You have this fantastic job in The Hague, and why would you go to the Middle East? Just several people have been killed. Why would you go there?" And the 3 other ambassadors said, "You absolutely have to go there because this is a unique opportunity in the Middle East. Impunity has always been the rule, and the prime minister has been killed. And if you can make a difference there, you go." And I remember that my mother learned, because it went so quickly from the media, that I was considered for this position. So she called me. She said, "I very much hope that you will not take the position, but I know you will take it." Because she knew or knows my character. But the only time I've seen her really crying, if I may say, was when the mothers of Srebrenica sent her a letter, a personal letter to my mother, to thank her for the work myself and my office were doing. I think this was very, very touching. So she had an exchange of letters over the last few years with the survivors. I never really looked at the details of it because I found it touching and embarrassing at the same time, as you can imagine.
Serge, I know you're a very humble man, but I'm also aware that there are other particular things that your mother would be hugely proud of. And I'd love you to share a little more about how the mothers of Srebrenica honored you in a very unique way. And also that you've had a unique experience in Belgium in terms of how you've been recognized within the Belgium community. So if you would be willing to share a little more, first about the mothers of Srebrenica.
I don't know exactly to what you are referring to, because I met them, I think, 40 times or 50 times.
Okay, well, they happened to nominate you for a Nobel Peace Prize, and I think that is pretty unique and significant context. So if you could share a little more about that, and I have no doubt your mother would be hugely proud of that too.
Right. Yes, well, that's of course one of the aspects one doesn't speak easily about. But indeed, one day the mothers of Srebrenica asked to come to The Hague to meet with me,
Yeah,
and they were telling me that they'd put my name forward, which normally you never mention publicly or you don't speak about. But they wanted to see my reaction, and they also
yeah,
spoke to the media about it afterwards. And my reaction obviously was to say that, look, I'm very honored, very pleased. And I told him that the fact that they would think that I deserve this kind of prize is the prize, right? Because
yes,
for a prosecutor, what can be a better recognition for a prosecutor than having the support and the recognition by the people we try to serve, victims and survivors? So for me, it was definitely a moment of happiness, recognition of the work my entire team and myself we had been doing for many years. Also knowing that the UN had failed the victims and survivors. Srebrenica was a safe haven. Normally, the UN had the duty to protect them, and they
yeah,
even sued the UN afterwards for
yes.
compensation. So in this context, to get this recognition from the victims and survivors meant a lot for me.
Yeah, and that's a remarkable acknowledgement. And as you said, for the people you were serving, Serge. And I'm also aware that you've had a unique situation in your country where you received a Nobel title, and I think you were the first German person from a German-speaking environment to have this honor. Can you share a little more about that, and how has that shaped you in terms of those early young adult experiences of feeling this kind of legacy of discrimination, if you like, against German-speaking
Yeah.
people?
Well, for many, it's difficult to understand that there are still nobility titles given to individuals, right? Belgium is a kingdom, like a number of countries around us. It's, of course, parliamentary democracy, and the king is the head of state, but it's in large part a more protocol function. But we have indeed in Belgium still the system where the Council of Nobility, which is composed by members of the Belgian nobility and some public figures, together with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, but also together with the royal family, can still give nobility titles. It can be chevalier, it can be sir, it can be baron. So I was very privileged to get a baron title. And, it's probably necessary to come from a country like mine, where we have a lot of respect for our royal family, and we consider the royal family as a sign of unity in a country which also has different cultures. And being probably the only or the first German-speaking Belgian who got this title, it was definitely allowed me to think back about my early days when I felt some discrimination, where I really thought, well, now I really arrived even more so in my own country that I like very much. And getting a recognition from your own country for the work you are trying to do for humanity, of course, it is great. I was very, very proud, but again, it's I'm perhaps more in the more visible than other members of my team. But everything I've done in life in all different functions, I could never have been as successful as I think I was if I had not a fantastic team around me. As I said, you can only be a leader if you have people following. If you are alone at the top and you don't have a team supporting you, I think we all fail.
Yeah. And Serge, as we say in Africa, it takes a village. And I have no doubt that your team, your village are equally proud of you. You're very humble, Serge. Is your mum still alive?
Unfortunately, she passed away last year, but no, she had, I think, a fantastic life. She was 86 years old. And we really had an excellent relationship.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's, what a joy for a mother to get a letter like that from other mothers in the world. And the last fun fact, what is something that few people know about you?
Well, the thing about those things is that you also you prefer not making them public. What do few people know about me? I don't know. Don't know what I should answer there. Well, that I was doing rock and roll competition when I was when I was between 18 and 20. I would be in a club of rock and roll, and I would do championships. I was vice Belgian champion in acrobatic rock and roll. This I don't think is very much known, and I don't think it's on the internet, right?
That is amazing. Well, next time I see you, Serge, I want to see some of those rock and roll moves. That's impressive. Any final thoughts you have around the future of leadership and the need for bold leadership?
I have learned in my many years in the job that there is not only one form of leadership, and that leadership can be and must be very, very different depending on the size of the group you have to lead, the political, the religious context in which it is taking place. So I'm, when I became federal chief prosecutor in Belgium, it was my first really job with more than 100 staff members. And as a lawyer, you are not trained to be a leader. And so I started reading I asked one of my friends who had a master in business administration, give me a few books about leadership to read. And so I read a number of books, and it was very inspiring to find many notions I was automatically applying in relation to a delegation, in relation to trust, in relation to communication, because at the end of the day, it's all about communication. And so I think there are some rules or some principles you can apply in terms of leadership, but you always need to adapt it to a certain context. In the UN, we have this opportunity I used last year to have an external consultant make an evaluation about your leadership. So he interviewed 5 peers within the UN, 5 other under-secretary generals. He interviewed 5 or 10 of my senior prosecutors and 10 of the more junior prosecutors. all anonymous. And I had to do myself my evaluation about my own leadership capabilities. And they would do my evaluation. And then with this coach, he would tell you the results about how you see yourself, how you are seen by the others, and then working on it. So we're not going into details about the results of this, but my point is it's a lot of self-reflection is necessary, a lot of listening to others. And at the end of the day, the most important also out of this analysis was communication. Because the most critical point, I would say, was that my direct level of senior management was very happy with the communication. Yeah, I speak with them every day. But that the problem was more at the next level, who were not close enough to the leadership to be really enough associated in the decision-making process, or would not receive enough communication about what has been decided. So communication, I think in a job, in politics, and in relationships, I think remains the number one element one should really pay attention to.
Yeah, Serge, well, thank you so much. And, my experience of you is your incredible communication capability, actually. But thank you so much for being a light and by the way, I truly believe that you are changing the world. You're doing it one case at a time. And thank you for your purpose, your passion, and for your voice. We appreciate you. Friends, let's inspire action to strengthen international justice, peace, law, and order. Conversations with my inspiring friend, the Right Honourable Lord Dr. and Chief Prosecutor Serge Brammertz, helps us reassess why now, more than ever in this radically changing geopolitical world, we need to reform and strengthen our global systems and institutions that help us prevent wars, improve multilateralism, how nations work together, and uphold an international system of law and order. In 1945, the UN was created in response to the horrors of World War II. It was proposed by US President Franklin D. Roosevelt and led by the Big Three: Roosevelt, Winston Churchill, and Joseph Stalin. The UN was designed to help the world prevent future conflicts, to improve diplomacy, and to uphold an international system of law and order to hold bad actors to account. Despite the UN's imperfections and critics, the current call for reform is an outstanding opportunity to build on the excellent work already done. Serge Brammertz is one of the world's leading international criminal prosecutors. He is currently the chief prosecutor of the International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, an international court set up by the UN Security Council to help the world track down, prosecute, and convict bad actors worldwide. Serge highlights 5 critical leadership principles. The first, nobody is above the law. The second, it takes time to track down, prosecute, and convict war criminals, international criminals, bad actors, people like the Bosnian Serb leader in the former Yugoslavia, Radovan Karadzic, or the Bosnian Serb army commander, Ratko Mladic, or Felician Kabuga, a wealthy businessman who helped fund the genocide in Rwanda. And sometimes it takes a long time. The third principle is that justice may be delayed, but not denied. The fourth, a global accountability system helps create a functional world order that benefits all of humanity, politically, socially, and economically. Stock markets, investors, and corporate boards do not like crisis, chaos, and instability. The fifth principle, it takes you, bold people like you, to publicly push back and remind lawmakers and lawbreakers that the rule of law is sacrosanct. 2025, we have seen a remarkable shift in the geopolitical world order. We have much more work to do. Very recently, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, issued a stark message to the world. He observed that we are currently experiencing a radical change in global power dynamics, which nations align with whom, which goes to the heart of multilateralism and how we work together as nations around the world. And that underpins our very ability to maintain an international system of law and order. He warns that threats to our global institutions like the UN Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights, and our international courts and laws could upend the world in every way. He predicts that if our multipolar, polarized world does not have rules and guardrails, it means chaos, unpredictability, and violence. We cannot afford this. But friends, let me remind you that historically it was bold men and women like you that stood firm and stood tall to meet these risks and challenges. You are the key that can enable and empower the world to uphold a rule of law and deliver justice. The world is counting on you. It is the rule of law that protects us all, and justice may be delayed, but never denied. So until next time, remember that leading boldly is about making thoughtful, clear choices. And bold leadership is about taking bold action, just one small step at a time, one step for you. But together, as we uphold the rule of law, a giant step for humanity. So take care and take thoughtful, bold action.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leading Boldly into the Future. Please find links and connections mentioned in this show in our blog and never miss an episode by subscribing at anne-pratt.com. That's ANNE-PRATT.com. May these insights from inspiring industry leaders, remarkable disruptors, and courageous champions of change bring forth a brand new you, emboldened, empowered, and ready to inspire hope. Come back soon, share with your friends, sign up on anne-pratt.com and join our movement for change. Why? Because the world needs you to lead boldly too.